Hi, Hana family. Welcome back to another episode. Do hope you've enjoyed what you've been hearing so far on this channel. If you have, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it, and I do a happy dance for every new subscriber. So, on with the show. Story 1. Layers. I've always been aware that my house was haunted. The first time I saw anything, I was about 7 or 8 years old. I think it's just unfortunate where my house is situated. It seems almost unreal, actually. I live in a house that's nearly 200 years old. It's built on the grounds of an old prison. At the back of my house are fields where there used to be an abbey. At one time, the abbey was raided, and the monks were hung from the trees around it. Some of those trees are still standing. On either side of my semi-detached house are 2 churches and 1 graveyard. Across the road was an old hospital. It's since been demolished, but when it was standing, it was known to be haunted. Just up from this side is a famine graveyard that wasn't discovered until some unfortunate soul built their house on it. I believe there's at least 3 different spirits that live in my home. One is a lady who's dressed in Victorian clothing. I only ever see her on the stairs. We have wooden bars running down my stairs so that you can see all the steps. To go from the kitchen to the living room, you have to pass by the side of the stairs. One evening, I was going from my kitchen into my living room to watch TV when I felt the hairs stand up on my neck, and for some reason got the urge to look over my shoulder, to look at the stairs. And there, right beside me, this lady was coming down the stairs. I know these spirits won't harm me, but it didn't stop me from running out of the house, into the back garden, in the middle of winter, to wait for someone else to come home before I'd go back in. Whenever I'm in the hallway, at the foot of these stairs, I always feel like someone's behind me. The phone is in this hall, and I can't sit and talk on it unless my back is against the wall. I spend the whole time looking over my shoulder. The second spirit I have, I've never actually seen. He's a regular in the house, but only noise-wise. We have a room at the foot of the stairs where we keep our piano. I know at one time a German man lived in this house. He apparently also used to have a piano in that room, but on a different wall. Every night, around 10 minutes till 1, the scraping of wood on wood can be heard in this room. I assume he's slowly changing the position of the piano. It's been happening since my parents moved into this house, which was before I was born nearly 30 years ago. I'm assuming he's been doing this for a while, because when my parents got the house, after the old lady who lived in the house between us and him, she had apparently had that door sealed shut with paint. My parents had to break into it. This fellow is not scary. All he does is move the piano around. The third resident ghost that I'm aware of is not as pleasant as the other 2. Maybe he was one of the residents of the old prison. I don't know for sure, but I do know it's a man. I have encountered him on many occasions, mostly in my bedroom. Once, when I was about 12, I was standing in front of my mirror. I was just making faces, goofing off as kids do. Having tired of this, I started to leave the room. Just as I did, I heard a man hoarsely whisper for me to stay. The rest of my family was downstairs. He only succeeded in making me fly down the stairs faster than I have ever ran down those stairs before. Years passed, and I heard him again. It was in the middle of the night, and I wasn't really listening to him, since he was only whispering. I couldn't quite make out what he said. I've had 2 scary encounters with this man. Once, while I was in my brother's room, playing on his computer, the hairs on my neck went up, and I felt a shiver. I recognized the someone's coming feeling. I got up to leave the bedroom. When I tried to open the door, it was shut tight. Strange, since my house is very old, so even the doors, when closed and locked, still rattle loosely. This door wasn't rattling. This door wasn't moving. I got very scared, and I started to scream and shout while flinging myself against the door. After 5 minutes, the door swung open, and I fell out. At the bottom of the stairs, which is directly in front of my brother's room, stood my brother. He was telling me to shut up because he couldn't hear the television. I ran down, convinced that he had locked me in there, and told my mom. She, however, insisted that he had only left the room once, and that was when he came to the bottom of the stairs to call me. The second scary incident was when I was asleep. I dreamed that a man was standing over me and was leaning down, restricting my chest. I suddenly woke up. Everything was just how I had dreamed it, except I could no longer see the man, but I could still faintly feel his hands on my chest. Apart from all these experiences, we also have the usual: lights being turned off and on, footsteps, televisions being turned off and on, cabinet doors opening and closing by themselves. Your run-of-the-mill hauntings. I think their presence makes our old house a lot more interesting. Story 2. Grandmother's House. This story isn't about me directly. It's about my mother's childhood home. My mom and I are very close, and she often tells me stories about the house that she grew up in. She lived with my grandma and her 6 sisters. This house is located in a small town in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. It's a big house, 3 stories. My grandmother has since moved and now lives in another state. My family, cousins, aunts, uncles, go to visit her for 2 weeks every summer. I have a big family. My grandmother's one of 7 daughters. I have 19 cousins altogether. My cousin Josh and I are both the same age, and we're very close. One night, one summer, my family went out to eat, and my cousin and I stayed at home with Grandma. We were playing games when I asked my grandma about the house that they lived in when my mom was a child. She said at night she would hear tapping sounds on the wall above her bed, and that the bathroom sink in her room would just turn itself on all by itself. My aunt, Josh's mom, said that she used to see a little girl in her room at night playing with her toys, and she told her mother, my grandma, about it. My grandma told us that she let my aunt sleep in her room, and grandma in turn slept in my aunt's room. The first night she didn't see the little girl, but the second night she did. She said she wasn't scared of the little girl at all. After that night, more weird things started happening. There were only 4 girls living with my grandma at this time, because my 3 oldest aunts had moved out and gotten married. My mom and my Aunt Stacy shared a room, and my Aunt Lacey and Jane had their own room because they were much older. One night, about a week after my grandma had seen the little girl, Aunt Jane came running down the stairs crying and asked if she could sleep downstairs. So my grandma let all the girls sleep downstairs that night, and they got to stay up later and play since it was a Saturday night. About 1:30 a.m., they all went upstairs screaming and woke my grandma up. They said they had heard the pots and pans in the kitchen being moved around. Then they said the curtains in the living room started to open and close. So they all sat on my grandma's bed and listened to the sounds downstairs. My grandma decided that it was time to move. She looked around for a new house and found one she liked. About a month later, they were all packed up and ready to move. It was their last night at the house, and my grandma was laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. She heard her door creak open. It was too dark for her to see who it was, but she figured it was one of the girls coming to lay with her, so she waited for them to get on the bed. But 15 seconds later, the covers flew off of her. She turned and turned the light on, but there was no one in the bedroom. There was no one in the bed with her, and the door was closed. I believe the story is true because my grandma is a very serious person, and because all of my aunts tell the exact same story. Story 3. The Old House. The house was over 150 years old when my parents purchased it in 1957, and my family lived there until the mid-80s. During the almost 30 years we were in the house, we experienced many paranormal things. There were several spirits that lived in the house. A soldier, guardian type spirit stood watch outside my sister and my bedroom. There also seemed to be a young girl in the bedroom closet. She was very sad, as well as frightened. We always had the feeling that she had been locked in there as some sort of punishment, and perhaps died in our closet. There was a young couple dressed in evening clothes. that would regularly appear to my mother, and there was an evil-tempered dog that lived in the attic. Oftentimes, objects would disappear from my sister in my bedroom. One year, Anne, my sister, received a transistor radio and took it to bed with her. Upon waking the next morning, it was gone. My mother unsuccessfully searched the room from top to bottom, every nook and cranny. She even changed all the sheets on both our beds in an attempt to locate this radio. My mother eventually stood in the middle of the room and in a very loud, stern voice said, "I don't care who took the radio, but bring it back now." The next morning, my sister found the radio in bed with her. After my parents had passed on, my siblings and I decided to sell the house. None of us wanted to empty the attic. It meant having to go up there, and we decided to leave it for last. In our dining room on the mantel was an old lithograph of a young boy spinning a wheel down a street with a stick. Along the side of this boy was a dog that, in my mind, looked rather rabid. As we were bringing items out of the house in preparation for a yard sale, I took the picture off the mantel and placed it on the ground, leaning it against the house. I made sure to put a substantial angle on it to prevent it from falling and breaking the glass. I went back inside for another armful of items, and when my sister and I returned outside again, we found the picture frame lying on the ground, the back of the picture laying approximately 2 feet from the frame, and the picture of the dog blowing down the street. We returned to the house and ran upstairs, and immediately felt that the presence of the dog in the attic was gone. When one particular real estate agent came in to look at the house, she asked my brother if he knew that there were spirits in the house. He answered, "Of course, we grew up with them. They're part of the house." My siblings and I have gone our separate ways, but each of us have, on occasion, still felt the presence of spirits that have followed us from that house, and other spirits that just seem to pick up along the way. Maybe we're all sensitive. I just don't know. Story 4. A Grand Estate. This house is huge. 3 stories, 18 rooms. It's a Queen Anne Victorian, built in 1856 for a man and his soon-to-be bride. It was sold in the early 1900s to a judge and his wife, and in the 1970s, my husband and I purchased the house from the judge's widow. The house had been divided into 2 apartments when we purchased it, and within a few months we had knocked out some walls and restored it to its original one-family home. There were 3 small rooms on the 3rd floor. One overlooks the front yard. The other 2 rooms held pictures and documents and legal briefs from the judge. Many of his books and files and notes were still housed in the carriage house on the property. I found all this to be quite fascinating and wondered if our local historical society would be interested in any of these documents. Meanwhile, things kept appearing inside the house, mostly in the kitchen. It was my habit to put breakfast dishes in hot soapy water, then drive our sons to school, and then come home and do the dishes. On several occasions, old kitchen utensils that I've never owned would be in the sink to be washed. My sons told me that they could see a man looking out of the 3rd floor window, watching them as they played in the yard. Their description matched that of the judge. The house has a cold spot between the kitchen and the dining room, at the foot of a private staircase that had been boarded over when we purchased the home. That staircase led directly to a 2nd-story bedroom. It supposedly was direct access to the servants' quarters, and also a room for a special needs child that lived in the home. I do not know who the child belonged to, whether it was the original owners or the second owners of the house. We never got around to opening up the stairwell. What convinced me this house was haunted? Well, I don't remember the exact date, but I was getting ready to go to my monthly Eastern Star meeting. I showered and did my hair in the small 2nd-story bathroom. I went into the bedroom to finish, and the judge's clothing, an aged tuxedo, had been laid out on the bed. I was the only one at home. I will tell you, I did always feel safe in this house. I never felt the spirits meant me or my children any harm. Sadly, after we moved out, the house has fallen into disrepair. It's a home crying out for love and attention. There was an energy to that home when we lived there, a good energy. Someone needs to buy it and breathe new life into it.